For a whole year, in secret, I had been helping my husband's elderly driver with money, a man he had fired without a cent. Today, he intercepted me by the store and whispered, "Tomorrow, do not get in the car with your husband. Take the bus. It's a matter of life and death. You will understand everything when you see who is on that bus." And so, I got on the bus. Hello. Write in the comments where you are listening from. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Enjoy the story, but before that whisper turned her life upside down, it was just another Tuesday, a gray day that smelled of dust and detergent. Carol stood by the cash register of the home goods store, mechanically arranging a stack of terry towels. She was 38, but in the reflection of the store window, under the fading afternoon light, she saw a much older woman. Her shoulders, used to carrying heavy boxes of merchandise, were slightly stooped, and shadows had settled in the corners of her eyes that no cream could erase. "Carol, dear, ring this tablecloth up for me too," a regular customer, an elderly woman in a beige coat, rasped. "But check it for snags, will you, after last time?" "Of course, Mrs. Gable." Carol's voice was soft with a familiar, reassuring calm. She unfolded the fabric, running her fingers over the linen. They were a worker's fingers, with short nails and dry skin, the hands of a woman unafraid of labor, but sometimes ashamed to place them on the table when she was a guest. She smiled at the customer, but her thoughts were far away. Today was the 18th, the day she committed her small, secret crime against the family budget. When the store closed and the heavy metal shutters came clattering down, separating the bright world of the display windows from the dark street, Carol did not go straight home. She adjusted her coat, not new, bought on sale 3 years ago, but still good quality, and gray, and turned toward the park. In her pocket, inside an old leather wallet, was a white envelope. It didn't contain much, just $100. For some, that was a dinner at a restaurant. For Carol, it was a new pair of winter boots she hadn't bought herself this season. But for the person waiting for her on a park bench, it was life. Walter, her husband's former driver, the man who had driven for Art for 5 years, sat hunched under an old sycamore tree. One day, Art had come home furious, tossed his keys onto the entryway table, and said, "I fired the old man. He's gotten unreliable, forgetful, and besides, the car reeked of stale cigarette smoke." Carol knew Walter hadn't smoked in 10 years, and she also knew that Walter's unreliability consisted only of him having seen too much and kept an all-too-honest silence. But she didn't argue with her husband then. She rarely did. She simply started setting aside a little money, from bonuses, from extra shifts, from skimping on her own lunches. "Walter," she called out softly. The old man started, raising his head. In the lamplight, his face looked like translucent paper. He tried to stand, leaning on his cane, but she stopped him with a gesture. "Why did you come? It's cold out." "Here," she said quickly, glancing around, and slipped the envelope into his hand. The old man's hand was icy and trembled. "Get yourself that heart medicine you told me about, and some fruit. Don't forget the fruit." "Carol, my dear, you don't have to. If Art finds out, he'll kill me," he whispered, but his fingers clutched the envelope tightly. The old man's eyes grew moist. "You're a saint. He doesn't deserve you." "Oh, he doesn't deserve you. What are you saying?" Carol pulled away, embarrassed, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. Gratitude made her uncomfortable. She didn't consider herself a saint. She just remembered how Walter had picked her up from the hospital when their daughter was born, while Art was too busy in a meeting, how he had rocked Ashley's stroller while Carol ran into the pharmacy. "Go home, Walter, and take care of yourself." She patted his shoulder and walked quickly away, toward her house. At home, it was warm, but the atmosphere was thick. In the kitchen, the television was on. Art was sitting at the table, engrossed in his phone. In front of him was a plate of cold dinner he hadn't even touched. Art was a handsome man. Even now, at 41, with a budding paunch and thinning hair, he retained that polished air of a mid-level manager that had once won Carol over. But today, something about him was different. He flinched when the front door slammed shut and quickly turned his phone screen down. "You're back?" he asked without looking at her. "Dinner looks great, thanks. I'm just not hungry." Carol took off her coat, feeling the usual weariness in her legs. "You look a little pale, Art. Did something happen at work?" "No," he answered too sharply. Then he caught himself and forced a smile. The smile came out crooked. "A little guilty. No, everything's fine. Just tired. Hey, Carol, tomorrow I have to go to Oak Ridge. There's a mandatory regional development seminar." Oak Ridge was a small town about 25 miles away. Art often traveled for work, but he usually complained about it. Today, however, he seemed nervous. "Okay." Carol turned on the electric kettle. "Do you want me to iron a shirt for you?" "I'll do it." He jumped up. Just then, his phone vibrated silently on the table. He snatched it as if it were a grenade. "I'll iron it myself. And you know what? I'll give you a ride to work tomorrow. I have to leave early anyway." Carol froze, cup in hand. Art hadn't driven her to work in at least 2 years, claiming it was out of his way and the traffic was bad. "You want to drive me?" she asked again. "Yeah, what's wrong with that? We're a family, aren't we?" He came over and gave her a clumsy kiss on the cheek. His lips were dry, and his shirt smelled of a sharp, unfamiliar women's perfume. Someone must have been smoking near him at the office, she thought. Or not? Carol pushed the thought away. She was used to trusting. Trust was the foundation her marriage stood on, even when the passion had long since faded. "Thank you," she said softly. "That would be great. My legs are really aching." Later that night, when Art went to the bathroom, taking his phone with him, Carol realized she had forgotten to buy milk for Ashley. Her daughter, a bright girl, was in her room studying for exams, and Carol didn't want to bother her. She threw her coat on over her bathrobe and hurried out to the small 24-hour convenience store near their house. The street greeted her with a damp wind. The streetlight above the entrance flickered, casting trembling shadows on the sidewalk. Carol bought a carton of milk and a loaf of bread and was just stepping back out onto the sidewalk when a figure detached itself from the darkness at the corner of the building. She let out a choked cry, clutching the groceries to her chest. It was Walter. But he looked different now than he had an hour ago in the park. His face was ashen, his lips were trembling not from the cold, but from fear. He was breathing heavily, as if he had run the whole way. "Walter, what are you doing here?" He came closer and grabbed her by the sleeve of her coat. His grip was iron tight, desperate. "Carol, listen to me," he whispered, glancing up at the lit windows of her apartment. "Tomorrow, do not get in his car, you hear me? Do not get in." "What? Why?" Carol recoiled, frightened. "He offered himself. He offered so he could control you, so he'd know exactly where you are." Walter swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively. "Don't you dare go with him. Tomorrow morning at 7:15, a public bus leaves for Oak Ridge, the same one regular folks take." "Why would I go to Oak Ridge? I have to get to work." "To hell with work." The old man's voice broke into a croak. "It's a matter of life and death, Carol. The life you fool, think is yours." Carol stood frozen. The cold seeped under her coat, seizing her heart. She had never seen the kind, quiet Walter like this. Terror sloshed in his eyes. "Get on that bus," he repeated, releasing her sleeve and stepping back into the shadows. "Just sit and watch. You will understand everything when you see who is on that bus." He vanished into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Carol alone under the flickering streetlight. In her hands was the carton of milk, and in her head, a ringing, terrifying void. Up in her window, the silhouette of Art appeared. He was on the phone with someone again. Carol looked at the window, then at the empty street where the old man had disappeared. For the first time in many years, she felt the familiar, firm, and safe ground begin to crumble beneath her feet. "In the morning," Carol lied. It was the first lie in 20 years of marriage, and it came with an unexpected ease, as if her tongue found the words on its own. "Ashley isn't feeling well. She has a terrible stomach ache. I'll stay home for now. I'll call the doctor, and then I'll make my own way in." Art, already in the hallway with his keys in hand, didn't even glance toward their daughter's room. He just nodded, blew a kiss in the air near Carol's ear, and walked out the door, muttering something about being late. Carol waited until the sound of the engine faded, and only then did she put on her coat. Her hands were shaking so badly that she couldn't get her arm into the sleeve on the first try. The bus station greeted her with the smell of exhaust fumes and fried donuts. The bus to Oak Ridge, an old, rattling vehicle, was already at the bay, wheezing smoke. Carol got on, trying not to look up, and sat in the very back, by the window. She felt as if everyone knew why she was there, as if it were written on her forehead, "Wife spying on her husband." The bus was half empty, a few retirees with empty shopping baskets, a student with headphones, and a woman with a girl of about 7 sitting 2 rows ahead. The bus lurched forward, swaying heavily over potholes. Carol stared out the window at the gray apartment buildings rushing by, but she didn't see them. Walter's words echoed in her head. "Go. Watch." The little girl in front began to fidget, knelt on her seat, and looked back, directly at Carol. Carol froze. Her heart skipped a beat, then another, and began to pound in her throat, making it hard to breathe. The girl had Art's eyes, the same almond shape, the same slightly drooping outer corner that gave his gaze an eternal, touching sadness, and a chin with a tiny dimple that Carol had kissed so many times on her husband. The girl looked at her with childish curiosity, twisting a lock of blonde hair around her finger exactly the way Art did when he was nervous or thinking. But it wasn't the face that held Carol's gaze. On the girl's neck, over her pink jacket, hung an antique silver locket in the shape of an oval shell. Carol remembered that locket. She had found it in the pocket of Art's jacket about 6 months ago. "It's a gift for Mom's anniversary," he had said then, quickly putting the piece of jewelry away. "I took it to get fixed. The clasp was broken. And then they lost it at the shop. Can you believe it? I raised hell, but what good did it do?" Carol had comforted him then, saying it was the thought that counted. Now, that lost locket was shining on the neck of a strange little girl with her husband's eyes. Carol gripped the bar of the seat in front of her so hard her knuckles turned white. The air in the bus became unbearably thin. She wanted to scream, to stop the bus, to run, but she sat there, paralyzed by the horror of recognition. "Lily, sit down properly," the woman beside her chided. She was young, pretty, with a stylish haircut. Victoria. The name surfaced in her memory on its own. Out of nowhere. She didn't know her name, but for some reason, it fit this well-groomed woman in a fashionable coat. The bus pulled into Oak Ridge. The woman and the girl stood up and moved toward the exit. Carol, as if in a dream, got up after them. Her legs felt like they were made of cotton, not her own. They got off at a stop in a neighborhood of nice houses. Carol kept her distance, hiding behind the few passers-by and lampposts. She felt like a thief, a criminal stalking someone else's happiness, but there was nothing left to steal. Her own happiness was turning to dust with every step. The woman and the girl turned down a side street lined with neat brick houses. Parked next to one of them, with a green fence and a well-tended front yard, was a familiar car, Art's silver sedan. Carol stopped at the corner of the next house, pressing her back against the cold brick wall. She peeked out just enough to see the front door. The gate opened. Art stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing a casual sweater, the same one with the reindeer that Carol had given him last Christmas and which, according to him, he had forgotten in a locker at work. In his hands, he held a large mug of steaming tea. "Daddy! Daddy's here!" the little girl shrieked, dropping her backpack and running to him. Art set the mug down on the railing, opened his arms, and caught the girl. He lifted her into the air, spinning her around, laughing. Carol hadn't heard him laugh like that in years. Genuine, loud, young. "My princess, how was the trip?" He kissed the top of the girl's head, then set her down and walked over to the woman. He wrapped his arm around her waist with a possessive, familiar gesture. The woman said something to him, smiling, and adjusted the collar of his sweater. Art leaned in and kissed her. Not on the cheek, the way he had kissed Carol that morning. On the lips, long and tenderly. Carol slid down the wall. Her legs refused to hold her. She sat right on the damp, dirty asphalt, not caring about her coat. This wasn't an affair, not a casual fling on a business trip. This was a life. Another life. A real, full life where Art was happy and at ease. A life where he was a father to a little girl with his eyes. A life where there was no place for Carol. And judging by the girl's age, there hadn't been for about 7 years. Something inside her chest snapped, like a taut string that had been holding her together all these years. Carol covered her mouth with her hand to keep from sobbing out loud. Her shoulders shook with silent crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot, salty, smudging her mascara, dripping onto the gray collar of her coat. She sat on the ground, a small, crushed woman, watching the idyllic scene behind the green fence through a veil of tears. She remembered how she had scrimped on groceries to buy Art good shoes, how she had mended his socks, how she had believed every word about meetings and business trips, how foolish she had been, how blind, how pathetic. Art picked up the girl's backpack from the ground, put his other arm around his wife, and the three of them went into the house. The door closed, shutting Carol out from their warmth. She was left alone in a strange town, on the dirty asphalt, with a hole in her chest the size of that house. She tried to breathe, but the air caught in her throat like a thorny knot. She curled up, hugging her knees, burying her face in the damp wool of her coat. Finally, she let herself cry aloud, quietly, whimpering like a beaten dog that had been thrown out into the cold. Carol didn't get up from the ground right away. First, she braced herself with a palm against the rough brick. Then, slowly, like an old woman, she straightened her back. Her knees were wet and dirty. But it didn't matter. She brushed off her coat with a mechanical, meaningless gesture and walked away from the house with the green fence. The journey back was a blur. She didn't remember getting on the bus, how she got back to her city, how she opened the door to her apartment. She just sat in the kitchen, staring at the cold kettle, and waited. Art returned 3 hours later. He came in whistling. He dropped his keys on the entryway table, the same sound that had always meant his return home. "Carol, I'm home," he called from the doorway. "Guess what? The seminar ended early. I bought a cake." He stopped short as he entered the kitchen. Carol was sitting at the table, motionless. She didn't even turn her head. Her coat was still balled up on a nearby chair, stained with dirt at the hem. "Carol, what's wrong with you?" A note of unease crept into his voice. Did something happen to Ashley? Carol slowly raised her eyes to him. There were no tears in them, just an infinite, leaden exhaustion. "I saw her, Art. Her and the girl, Lily." The silence that fell over the kitchen was thick, vibrating. Art turned pale instantly. The cake box slipped from his hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud, but he didn't even flinch. You were in Oak Ridge," he whispered. "She has your eyes," Carol said in a flat, lifeless voice. "And your locket, the one you lost." Art collapsed into the chair opposite her. All his confidence, all the polish of a successful manager, vanished like a shell. He covered his face with his hands. "Carol, forgive me. I didn't want this. I didn't know how to tell you." He began to cry. Not the way a man cries from grief, but pathetically, sobbing, smearing tears across his face. "It was an accident, really, 7 years ago. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I love you, Carol, but I couldn't abandon them. Lily is just a child." Carol looked at him and felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just disgust. She looked at this man with whom she had shared a bed, a table, and a life, and she saw a coward. "You didn't want to hurt anyone?" she asked quietly. "You've been lying to me for 7 years, every day, every minute." Just then, the front door opened. The sound was authoritative, confident. Trudy, Art's mother, walked into the hallway. She had always had her own keys and came in without knocking. "What is going on here?" Her voice cut through the air like a knife. She scanned her tearful son, the crushed cake on the floor, and the motionless Carol. "Art, stop your sniveling. Get up." Art sniffled but obediently straightened up, wiping his face on his sleeve. Trudy slowly pulled off her gloves, placed them neatly on the table, and turned to her daughter-in-law. There was not a trace of compassion in her gaze, only cold calculation. "So, you found out," she stated calmly, as if discussing a broken cup. "Well, it's about time. It was foolish to hide it forever." "You knew?" Carol wasn't asking. She was stating a fact. "Of course I knew," Trudy sniffed. "Who do you think helped Art buy that house? On his salary? Don't make me laugh." She walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down, straightening her back majestically. "Listen to me, Carol. You're a good housekeeper, a faithful wife, but you couldn't give my son the most important thing, an heir." Carol felt the blood drain from her face. "We have a daughter, Ashley." "A daughter is wonderful," Trudy replied with a dismissive wave, "but a man needs a son, someone to carry on the family name. After Ashley, you couldn't have any more. And Victoria? Victoria is young, healthy. She's already given him a daughter, and she'll give him more. Perhaps a boy. You introduced them." Carol couldn't believe her ears. "I helped my son get what he needed," the mother-in-law cut her off sharply. "And if you were smarter, you would have understood it yourself. You saw how he was suffering, how he wanted more children, but you were silent. You buried yourself in your work, in your garden. You stopped being his wife, Carol. You became a convenient roommate." Trudy's words hit where it hurt the most. Carol remembered the nights Art tried to talk about a second child, and she, exhausted after her shift, would brush him off. "There's no money, Art. How would we manage? We can barely raise Ashley." She remembered how she had stopped wearing makeup for him, how she had stopped asking him what he dreamed of. She thought she was protecting the family, saving her strength and money. But it turned out she herself had opened the door for another woman. "I'm not justifying Art," Trudy continued, seeing her daughter-in-law crumble, "but you're no saint either. Now, for the important part. You can't get a divorce. Art has a career. Elections coming up. A scandal is not good for him, and not for you either. Where would you go? To a shared apartment on your store clerk's salary?" Carol was silent. "Everything will stay as it is," Trudy decreed. "Art will live here and visit Victoria, say, on weekends. You will keep up appearances, your status as a married woman. The apartment, Ashley will finish school peacefully. Everyone's happy. And if I don't agree?" Carol's voice trembled. "And who's going to ask you?" Trudy smirked. "The whole town knows who Art Miller is. And who are you? Think about your daughter. Do you want her to be pointed at? The daughter of the woman who was left for someone younger?" That evening, Carol called Ellen, her lifelong friend. She needed to hear at least one supportive voice. Just one. "Oh, that's horrible. You poor thing," Ellen said after Carol told her. "Art has another family, in Oak Ridge." There was a pause on the line, a little too long. "You knew?" Carol asked, feeling the cold seize her heart again. "Carol, well, there were rumors." Ellen's voice sounded guilty but distant. "It's a small town. Someone saw his car there, but I thought, why would you need to know? You were happy." "Seemingly happy," Carol rephrased. "Well, you were living peacefully, Carol. Don't make any rash decisions. Men are all like that. But he supports you. He doesn't hit you. Trudy is probably right. Where would you go on your own now?" Carol hung up. The phone felt as heavy as a brick. She went out onto the balcony. The night city twinkled with lights. Somewhere in the darkness slept people who knew everything. The clerks in the neighboring stores, Art's colleagues, even her friends, they all looked at her and saw a fool who noticed nothing. "You became a convenient roommate." Her mother-in-law's words burned like a brand. Carol looked at her hands, gripping the balcony railing. Yes, she was to blame. To blame for letting herself become convenient, for turning a blind eye to his coldness, his absences, the disappearing money. She was afraid of conflict, afraid of losing this fragile world, and with her own fear, she had destroyed it. But now, there was no more fear. There was only emptiness and clarity. She returned to the room. Art was asleep on the living room sofa, covered with a blanket. Even in sleep, he looked pathetic, his legs curled up. Carol went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out an old duffel bag. She didn't know where she would go. She didn't know what she would live on. But she knew one thing for sure. She would no longer be convenient, and she would not live in a lie for status and Trudy's peace of mind. She began to pack her things, slowly and carefully. T-shirts, underwear, old jeans. Each item that went into the bag was like a brick in the foundation of a new, unknown, and terrifying life. In the morning, she would not make breakfast. In the morning, she would take the first step. In the morning, Carol didn't leave. The duffel bag remained in the corner of the bedroom, a silent rebuke to her indecision. Ashley woke up with a fever, pale and coughing, and a mother's instinct overrode her pride. Carol stayed, made chicken broth, gave her medicine, and every time she passed the living room where a dejected Art sat, she felt her insides clench into an icy knot. Around noon, her phone vibrated with a message, unknown number. The park, same bench, in an hour. It's important. Carol knew who it was. She left the house, telling her daughter she was going to the pharmacy. Her feet carried her on their own to the familiar sycamore tree. Walter was already waiting. This time, he wasn't hiding in the shadows but sat upright, his hands on the knob of his cane. On the bench next to him lay an old, worn-out logbook with a faux leather cover, the kind they gave drivers at the transport company 20 years ago. Walter. Carol walked up and sat beside him without looking at him. She was ashamed. Ashamed that he had warned her and she hadn't believed him. Ashamed that he had witnessed her disgrace. "You saw?" he asked in a low voice. "I saw." "Good." The old man nodded as if stamping a document. "Then, you're ready to listen now." He pushed the logbook toward her. "What is this?" "My conscience, Carol." Carol opened the first page. Walter's handwriting was large, angular, with a firm stroke. Dates, times, mileage, addresses. March 12. Oak Ridge. 14 Main Street waited 3 hours. Toy store, Viehmogführer. April 5. Central Bank, cash withdrawal. Oak Ridge, 14 Main Street package delivery. May 20. Healthy Kids Pediatric Clinic, Oak Ridge. Paid for consultation. The pages rustled under her fingers like dry leaves. Year after year, 5 years of meticulous records. "He wasn't just taking rides, Carol," Walter began, staring straight ahead. "I saw everything. I was his alibi." "Walter, just say we were at the construction site." "Walter, stop by the florist and buy a bouquet. Say it's from me while I make a call." I kept quiet because I needed the job. My pension is small. My wife is sick. I was selling my conscience for a paycheck, Carol. Carol was silent, turning the pages. "And then, a year ago?" The old man's voice trembled. "We were coming back from Oak Ridge. He was cheerful, ecstatic. His daughter, Lily, had said her first word or something. And I had the nerve to say, 'Mr. Miller.' But Ashley has her recital at the music school today. You promised you'd go." Walter smiled bitterly. He looked at me like I was trash. "You just drive, old man, and don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong," he told me. "Carol is a strong woman, she'll manage. Victoria needs help, she's all alone." And the next day, he fired me, said I was unreliable. Carol stopped at an entry dated 6 months ago. Central Bank. Withdrawal from education account, $1,500. Transfer for roof repair in Oak Ridge. The education account. Carol's blood ran cold. It was their untouchable savings, the money they had been putting away since Ashley was born for college, for tutors, for her future. Every cent in there was watered with her sweat, with her giving up a new coat, a vacation, a normal life. She flipped through the pages frantically. Withdrawal from education account, $500. Purchase of furniture for child's room. Withdrawal from education account, $2,000. He emptied the account. Carol's voice broke into a whisper. "Almost completely," Walter confirmed. "I drove him to the bank each time. He said he was investing, that the money had to work. And oh, it worked. On a roof repair in Oak Ridge and a private daycare for Lily." Carol closed the logbook. Her hands were shaking with a fine, unpleasant tremor. This was worse than infidelity. Infidelity could be explained by passion, a mistake, a weakness. But this was theft. He wasn't stealing from her. He was stealing from his own daughter. From Ashley, who dreamed of studying architecture, who spent nights sketching blueprints, who believed her father was proud of her and would help her. Art hadn't just betrayed his family. He had methodically and calculatedly, dollar by dollar, destroyed the future of his first daughter to build a comfortable nest for his second. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Carol asked without looking up. "I was afraid," Walter answered honestly. "Afraid of him. afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you'd say, "The old man is senile, getting revenge for being fired." You loved him, Carol. You prayed for him. He placed his dry, rough hand on hers. But now I see you have nothing left to lose. Take this logbook. It's not just paper, it's evidence. If he starts playing games, if he says there's no money, show him this. Let him know his secret accounting isn't so secret. Carol clutched the logbook. It burned her fingers. Thank you, Walter. Don't thank me, my dear. The old man sighed deeply and stood up, leaning on his cane. I'm an accomplice too. I drove him. I stayed silent. Forgive me, if you can. He walked away down the path, more stooped than usual, a small figure in an old coat, carrying the weight of others' sins on his shoulders. Carol remained on the bench. The wind flipped through the logbook, revealing more and more dates. Purchase of coat, $1,000. Payment for stay at spa resort for mom, Trudy, $800. Carol remembered how Art had told her last winter, "Carol, it's a crisis. They cut my bonus this year. No gifts, okay? The important thing is we're together." She had agreed. She had felt sorry for him. She had prepared a festive dinner with what she had, and all the while, he was buying another woman a coat with his daughter's money. Something inside Carol burned away completely. The pity, the doubts, the fear. It all vanished, consumed by a white-hot flame of rage, a silent, cold, calculating rage. She stood up. Her movements became precise, sharp. She put the logbook in her purse. She zipped it shut with a dry sound, like a gunshot. She wasn't crying anymore. She had no tears left. All that remained was the desire to take back what belonged to her daughter. Carol walked home. She now knew what she would say to Art. And this time, he wouldn't get away with tears and pathetic excuses. Now she had a weapon in her hands, and she intended to use it. Carol entered the apartment and threw the logbook on the table, right in front of Art. The dull thud sounded like a judge's gavel. Art, who was sitting with the TV remote, jumped. He picked up the notebook, opened it to a random page, and his face instantly turned ashen. He flipped through the pages, and with each turn, he seemed to shrink, becoming smaller, more insignificant. Where did you get this?" he croaked, not looking up. "That doesn't matter." Carol's voice was as hard as steel. "What matters is what's written in it. You stole money from Ashley, from your own daughter." Art leaped to his feet, began pacing the room, clutching his head. "Carol, I'll return it all, I swear. It was temporary. I just had debts." "Debts for a coat? For a roof repair in Oak Ridge?" Carol didn't shout. Her calm scared him more than hysterics would have. "You will return everything. To the last cent. Of course, I'll sell the car." He grabbed her hands, looking into her eyes with dog-like devotion. "I'll list it tomorrow. I'll take out a loan. I'll fix everything. Carol, honey, do you hear me? Just don't leave. Don't tell Ashley. Don't ruin me." Fear sloshed in his eyes. A primal, animal fear. Fear of losing his comfortable life. Fear of scandal. Fear of what people would say. Carol saw that fear and mistook it for remorse. She took out a sheet of paper and a pen. "Write." "Write what?" "A promissory note. That you pledge to return the full amount you withdrew from the account within 1 month, and that you will cease all contact with that family completely." Art wrote quickly, sloppily, with misshapen letters. His hand was shaking. When he finished and handed her the paper, Carol saw he was crying again. "I'm an idiot, Carol. I'm an idiot. I almost lost everything. Thank you for giving me a chance." The following week passed like a strange, sweet dream. Art really did change. He came home at 6 on the dot. He brought groceries, expensive and delicious things they used to only afford on holidays. He fixed the dripping faucet in the bathroom himself, which had been leaking for 6 months. In the evenings, he sat with Ashley, helping her with her homework. Carol, passing her daughter's room, would hear their voices. "Dad, look! This projection is wrong." "You're right, Ash. Good eye. You're so observant. Let's redraw it." Ashley was glowing. She didn't know the truth. She only saw that Dad had suddenly become attentive and caring, and Carol, watching her happy daughter, felt the knot of ice in her chest begin to melt. Maybe people do change. Maybe the fear of losing his family had really brought him to his senses. Even Trudy traded her anger for kindness. On Saturday, she invited Carol for tea. "Come in, Carol, dear. Sit down." The mother-in-law poured tea into her best china. On the table were pastries from a fine bakery. "I've been thinking, maybe we were too hasty. We're all human. We all make mistakes." She pushed a bowl of jam toward Carol. "Art told me everything. About the car, the money. He's ready to do anything to save the family. And you know what? I support him. Family is the most important thing. And those youthful mistakes? Well, they happen. The main thing is that he's made a choice, and he chose you." Carol sipped her tea, listening to her mother-in-law's measured voice, and felt the tension that had gripped her for the past few days release. She wanted to believe God. How she wanted to believe that the nightmare was over. "Do you really think so, Trudy?" "Of course, dear. You are a wise woman. You were able to forgive. That is worth a great deal. Now we will fix everything. We will live better than before." That evening, the three of them had dinner together. Art joked, told stories from work. Ashley laughed, and her laughter filled the apartment with a living warmth. Carol looked at her husband. He seemed tired but calm. He really had put the car up for sale. She had seen the online ad. He had stopped hiding his phone, leaving it on the sofa, screen up. It seemed the storm had passed. Before bed, Art hugged her. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "I will never let you down again." Carol closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she fell asleep without heavy thoughts. She thought about how tomorrow was Sunday, how they would go for a walk in the park, how Ashley would soon start college and the money for her education would be there. That life, though cracked, had been pieced back together. She felt like a victor. She had won back her husband, her daughter's future. She had saved her home. That Sunday morning, the sun shone with a special brightness, flooding the kitchen with golden light. Carol was making pancakes, humming a tune. Art was still asleep. Ashley had gone for a run. Carol felt an astonishing lightness, as if she had taken off a heavy backpack she had been carrying uphill for years. She believed the worst was over. She believed that love and patience could fix anything. She didn't know that this was just the calm before the real storm. She didn't know that her victory was a house of cards that would collapse with a single, casual gust of wind. She was just making pancakes and smiling at the sun, enjoying this fragile, deceptive peace. The pancakes were cooling on the table, and the pen, of all things, ran out of ink at the most inconvenient moment. Carol wanted to make a shopping list. She remembered seeing a spare pen in Art's briefcase, which he had left in the hallway. She opened the flap of worn leather, rummaged in the side pocket. Her fingers brushed against a smooth, glossy square of paper. She pulled it out mechanically, thinking it was a business card or a receipt. It was a sonogram. A grainy black-and-white image, a tiny speck of life in the center of a dark circle. At the bottom was a date, May 22nd, 2 days ago. The day Art had stayed late at work to prepare the paperwork for the car sale. Carol stood in the hallway, clutching the image in her hand. The pancakes in the kitchen smelled of vanilla and home, but suddenly that smell became nauseating. She turned the photo over. On the back, in Art's familiar, sprawling handwriting, was written, "My son, my heir, I'm waiting for you." At that moment, in the pocket of Art's coat hanging on the rack, a phone rang. Not his main phone, but the second one he had supposedly thrown into the river as a sign of reconciliation. Carol slowly pulled out the device. The name Mom glowed on the screen. She pressed the answer button but didn't bring the phone to her ear. She just stood there, listening. The volume was high, and Trudy's voice, sharp and confident, was clearly audible. "Artie, why aren't you answering?" Victoria called. "She's crying. Hormones are making her crazy. You should call her, calm her down. Tell her everything is going according to plan." Carol remained silent. "Hello? Art?" Her mother-in-law's voice became irritated. "What's the matter? Are you busy with your housekeeper? Just be patient, son. It won't be long now. As soon as Victoria gives birth to my grandson, we'll put the land in your name and kick Carol out. Let her go to hell. The main thing is to trick her into signing the papers for the lake house now while she's soft. The lawyer said as soon as it's joint property, we'll sell it to pay off the debts." Carol hung up. The phone slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor with a clatter. The sound of the crash woke Art up. He came out of the bedroom, sleepy, in his pajama bottoms, scratching his chest. "Carol, what fell?" He yawned, squinting in the sunlight. Carol slowly turned to face him. In one hand, she clutched the sonogram. With the other, she pointed at the phone on the floor. Art followed her gaze, saw the phone, saw the photo, and the sleep vanished from his eyes instantly. This time, he didn't cry. He didn't fall to his knees. He looked at her with the eyes of a cornered animal that understands. There is no escape. It's time to bite back. "You've been snooping through my things," he said coldly. It wasn't a question. "Housekeeper," Carol pronounced. The word felt foreign, prickly in her mouth. "To you people, I'm just a housekeeper you have to put up with until the heir is born." Art went to the kitchen, poured himself water straight from the pitcher, and drank greedily. "And what did you want, Carol?" He turned to her, his face twisting into a malicious grimace. "A wife? And what kind of wife are you? Have you looked in the mirror? You've turned into a shadow, a function. Fetch, serve, wash. You can't talk to you about anything other than the price of potatoes or Ashley's grades." Carol recoiled as if she had been struck. "I worked. I tried for us." "You tried to make everything proper," he interrupted. "To keep the peace, to keep everything quiet. You turned a blind eye to everything as long as there was no scandal. You knew I was unhappy. You felt it in your gut, but you kept quiet. It was convenient for you that I existed, that I brought home a paycheck, that you had status. You created this prison yourself, Carol. And Victoria is alive," she laughs. "She looks at me like a man, not an ATM or a piece of furniture." The words hit their mark. Carol knew there was truth in them. A bitter, terrible truth. She really had hidden behind routine. She really had been afraid to ask, "Are you happy?" because she feared the answer. "Yes," she said quietly. "I am to blame. I let our marriage die. I became boring and convenient." She raised her head and looked him straight in the eye. "But that didn't give you the right to steal from your daughter. It didn't give you the right to plan my eviction as if I were disposable waste. You could have left, honestly, told me to my face, 'I don't love you anymore.' But you are a coward, Art. You wanted a young wife and my cooking and Ashley's money and your mother's approval, the land." She suddenly remembered the lake house, my inheritance from Grandma. Art smirked contemptuously. "And how did you think I was going to pay my debts? Victoria is about to give birth. She needs comfort. And that piece of land is worth a lot. We're still married. By law, half of it is mine." "It's a personal inheritance," Carol whispered. "It's not divided. The lawyer will find a way," he said with a dismissive wave. "If you had just stayed quiet, you would have made it to the divorce peacefully. I might have even left you something. But now it's war, and my mother will make your life hell. You know her. You have no connections, no money, no backbone. You're going to lose." Carol looked at the man she had lived with for 20 years and saw a complete stranger, a cynical enemy before her, an enemy who had not only betrayed her but had planned her destruction. The illusion of victory shattered. The pancakes on the table, the sunlight, the hope it had all been the set for a monstrous play in which she had been cast in the role of the sacrificial victim. "Get out," she said. "This is my house too," Art retorted. "I'm not going anywhere." "Get out," she repeated, louder. "Or I'll go out on the balcony right now and start screaming. I will tell the whole neighborhood, every neighbor, what you've done. I'll call your boss. I will create the scandal you are so afraid of. I have nothing left to lose, Art. And you do." He looked at her warily. In her eyes, usually so soft and submissive, a wild, desperate fire was burning. Art spat on the floor, grabbed his briefcase and his jacket. Hysterical idiot. "We'll see what tune you're singing when my mother is done with you." The door slammed shut. Carol was left alone in the apartment that was no longer a home. She sank to the floor in the hallway, right where the phone lay. The sonogram was still clenched in her hand, crumpled into a ball. My son, my heir. She wasn't crying. She had run out of tears. Inside, there was only a scorched desert and a cold, ringing clarity. They wanted a war. They would get one. But she wouldn't be fighting for a husband or for the past. She would be fighting for the only thing she had left, her dignity. Carol didn't stay in the apartment. The walls were closing in on her. The air seemed poisoned by lies. She grabbed a hoe, put on old gardening gloves, and went to her small plot of land behind the house, the very same one they wanted to take from her. She worked furiously, hacking at the weeds as if they were the heads of her enemies. Dirt flew everywhere, smudging her face and clothes. She felt no fatigue, only a sharp, throbbing pain in her temples. Carol flinched and turned around. Standing at the gate was Mike, Art's father, a tall, thin old man, his shoulders perpetually stooped. His whole life, he had been his wife's shadow, a silent appendage to Trudy's iron will. Carol had rarely heard him say more than a few sentences at family dinners. "Go away, Mike," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I have nothing to say to your family." But he didn't leave. He opened the gate and walked in carefully, as if afraid to disturb the earth. In his eyes, usually dull and watery, there was something new today, a strange, desperate resolve. "I haven't come as an ambassador, Carol. I've come as a person." He walked over to an old apple tree and rested his hand on the gnarled trunk. 40 years, he said quietly. For 40 years, I've watched Trudy destroy people. First me. I wanted to be a painter, Carol. She said, "Go to the factory. There's stability there." And I went. Then she started on Art, molding him in her image. And this is what she molded. He looked at Carol. There was so much pain in his gaze that her anger subsided for a moment. "I was silent when she drove away your predecessor, Art's first girlfriend. I was silent when she taught him to lie. I thought time would fix it, that familiarity would breed affection, that it was family, after all." Mike reached into the pocket of his old knit jacket and pulled out a small black flash drive. "This morning, while you were at work, they were sitting in the kitchen. Trudy, Art, and that lawyer of theirs, a slippery fellow. I was in my room with the door ajar. They think the old man is deaf, that he's just watching TV. But I turned on the voice recorder." He held the flash drive out to Carol. His hand trembled, not from weakness, but from decades of accumulated anger. "Take it. It's all here. How they discussed your land. How Trudy said you had to slip the papers to sign when you were upset about Ashley. How Art laughed and said you were a gullible fool, that you'd sign anything if he cried a little." Carol took the cool plastic. It burned her palm. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "I'm saving what's left of my soul, Carol." The old man smiled bitterly. "I don't want to die knowing I allowed another life to be trampled. They will devour you if you don't strike first." He stepped closer and lowered his voice, though no one else was in the garden. "And one more thing you should know. Victoria is at the music school right now. There's a recital. Her students are performing. Art went there. He bought her a gold necklace with rubies. Told his mother it was a gift for the son. A necklace with rubies." Carol remembered Art telling her a month ago, "Carol, we can't afford the boots right now. Make do until winter, okay?" "At the music school?" she asked again. "Yes, in the auditorium. The concert starts in half an hour. Half the town will be there. Parents, teachers, the councilman." Mike looked her in the eye. "Trudy fears only one thing, Carol. Publicity. She has spent her whole life building a facade of a perfect family. If that facade crumbles in front of everyone, she will lose her power. And Art is a coward. He's only strong in the dark." Carol clenched the flash drive in her fist. A clear, precise plan formed in her head instantly. She didn't need a lawsuit that would drag on for years. She didn't need lawyers she couldn't afford. She needed the truth, a loud, relentless truth, spoken where it could not be silenced. She pulled off her dirty gloves and threw them on the ground. "Thank you, Dad," she said, calling him that for the first time in all these years. Mike nodded, and a tear rolled down his gray stubbled cheek. "Go, my girl, go and have no mercy on them. They had none for you." Carol ran toward the house. She had 20 minutes to change, find Ashley's portable speaker, and get to the music school. She no longer felt pain or fear. Inside her, steel resonated. She wasn't going to a concert. She was going to the execution of her past life. And the axe was in her hands. The music school was buzzing like a beehive. The lobby smelled of perfume, hairspray, and flowers. Elegant mothers adjusted their sons' bow ties. Girls in fluffy dresses nervously fidgeted with their sheet music. Carol cut through the crowd like an icebreaker, clutching the speaker in her hand. She saw them immediately. Art stood by a pillar, beaming in his best suit. Beside him was Victoria, beautiful, in a fitted dress that accentuated her rounded belly. And a little further away, like a queen observing her subjects, stood Trudy. Art was holding a velvet box in his hands. He was saying something to Victoria. She was laughing, throwing her head back. It was the perfect picture of a happy family. Carol walked up to them. The sound of violins from the concert hall stopped. An intermission had been announced. The lobby grew quieter. "Good evening," Carol said loudly. Art turned around. The smile slid off his face like a wet rag. Trudy tensed. Her eyes narrowed. "Carol, what are you doing here?" Art hissed, looking around. "Go home. Don't make a fool of yourself." "I came to offer my congratulations," Carol said, placing the speaker on a small table with programs. "For the air." Victoria stopped smiling. Her gaze darted from Carol to Art, sensing the tension in the air. "Art, who is this?" she asked, in a petulant voice. "This is the housekeeper, Victoria," Carol answered, looking her straight in the eye. "The one you have to put up with until the son is born." She pressed the play button on the speaker. Trudy's voice, amplified by the speaker, boomed through the lobby, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "As soon as Victoria gives birth to my grandson, we'll put the land in your name and kick Carol out. Let her go to hell." The people around them began to turn. Conversations died down. "The main thing is to trick her into signing the papers for the lake house," the lawyer said. "As soon as it's joint property, we'll sell it to pay off the debts." Trudy's face became blotchy with red spots. She tried to step toward the table to turn off the sound, but Mike blocked her path. He had appeared as if from nowhere, standing between his wife and Carol, his arms crossed over his chest. "Well, Victoria, just put up with her tantrums for a little while. When he's born, let her stay at home. The child is the important thing. Then we'll see. Maybe she'll become a handful too." Now Art's voice was coming from the speaker. Victoria turned pale. She looked at Art with horror. "You said you loved me, that we were a family." "Victoria, it's a setup, it's nonsense!" Art squealed, trying to grab her arm, but she slapped his hand away. "Are you paying for my delivery with your daughter's money?" she asked quietly, but in the silence, everyone heard her. "You stole from your own child." The recording ended. A dead silence fell over the lobby. Dozens of eyes stared at the perfect family. They stared with condemnation, with disgust, with pity. Trudy, who had always held her back so straight, suddenly seemed to stoop. Her power, built on the appearance of decency, had shattered. She opened her mouth to say something, but made no sound. Mike turned to his wife. "I'm leaving you, Trudy. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm taking my pension with me. Live as you see fit now, with your heir." He walked over to Carol and stood beside her. Victoria, swallowing tears, tore the chain from her neck, the one with the locket, and threw it at Art. "Don't you ever come near me again." She turned and ran for the exit, pushing through the crowd. Art was left alone in the middle of the lobby, a small, pathetic man with a velvet box in his hands that he no longer had anyone to give. He looked at Carol, and in his eyes there was an absolute void. "You destroyed everything," he whispered. "No, Art," Carol replied calmly. "I just turned on the light." She turned and walked toward the exit. She felt no triumph, only a huge, leaden weariness and a strange, ringing emptiness where her heart used to be. 8 months passed. The winter was snowy that year. Carol stood by the window of her small shop in the market square. The sign, "Hearth and Home," glowed with a warm yellow light. Behind the glass were stacks of linen tablecloths, embroidered napkins, soft blankets. It was her tiny business, but it was hers. She had opened it with money from the sale of part of her inheritance and a small loan that Mike had helped her secure. Her former father-in-law visited her often now. He brought her pies, helped with the bookkeeping. He lived in a rented room, painted pictures, and for the first time in 40 years, he seemed alive. Art disappeared. They said he had moved to another state, running from debts and shame. Trudy lived alone in her large apartment, and the neighbors said she had stopped going outside. Carol arranged a stack of towels. Her hands were still a worker's hands, but now there was no ring on her fourth finger. The mark was still there, a thin white line on her tanned skin that would probably never fade. The bell on the door jingled. Ashley came in, flushed from the cold, a portfolio case on her back. "Mom, hi. I passed my exam. Straight A's." Carol smiled. They had scraped together the money for the first semester with difficulty, but the judge had ordered Art to pay his debt, and the first small payments had started to come in. "You're so smart, my girl. Want some tea with thyme?" They sat in the back room, drinking hot tea from simple mugs. Outside, it was snowing, covering the city in a white blanket. Carol looked at her daughter, at the steam rising from her cup, and felt peace. It wasn't an overflowing happiness, it was the quiet, slightly melancholic joy of someone who has survived a shipwreck and built her own house on the shore. She had lost her husband, 20 years of her life spent on an illusion, the belief that love is forever. Sometimes at night, she still cried into her pillow, remembering the Art she had once loved, the one who perhaps never existed. But she had found herself. She was no longer a shadow, no longer convenient. She was Carol, a woman who knew how to stand on her own 2 feet, even when the ground was crumbling beneath them. In the evening, as she was closing the shop, she saw Walter. He was walking down the sidewalk with his wife, holding her arm. The old man saw Carol, stopped, and waved. Carol waved back. She breathed in the frosty air. It smelled of snow, pine, and hope. Life went on different, complicated, lonely, but honest, and that was the most important thing. Dear listeners, that is the end of Carol's story. A difficult, sometimes bitter story, but in my opinion, a very important one. What do you think? Did Carol do the right thing? Was it worth airing their dirty laundry and creating such a public scandal? Because many will say she should have been wiser, kept quiet, preserved the family for appearances' sake. And others will say they got what they deserved, and then some. And how would you have acted in her place? Could you have forgiven? Or would you have burned all the bridges too? Please write in the comments. I am truly interested in your opinion. The debates about what constitutes feminine wisdom and where it turns into self-abasement never cease. If this story touched you, if you sympathized with Carol, please give this video a like. This will help our channel grow and tell new stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the continuations of our other series. And if you want to know what happened to Victoria or Trudy, let us know in the comments. Perhaps we will take a look into their lives as well. I wish you all the best. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.